speak on my substantial amendment 45 on the list, together with the consequential amendments 42, 43 and 44. Now, I follow this bill closely from the stands. It's been televised on every occasion it has been debated. But my amendment at this stage seeks to delete the unnecessary and counterproductive clause 27, which is prematurely engaged at the very earliest stages of a potential sale and purchase agreement between the seller of a football club and perhaps a number of purchasers. Now, by deleting clause 27, notification will be engaged only once the parties have reached a conditional agreement at the heads of terms and a single preferred bidder has emerged. At that point, 28 would be engaged as on the face of the bill. Now, football is a game of dreams, and some of them dream so hard that they want to own their own club. And in a small way, I am one of those people, because back in 1932, my grandfather was an Olympic athlete, and he was known as Flying Fuller. And back then, he answered a small advertisement in the Eastern Daily Press and acquired 250 shares in the Norwich City Football Club. So when he passed away 40 years ago, I inherited those shares, and I've enjoyed attending the annual general meetings and just generally being a keen observer of how the business of football operates ever since. So for that 40-year perspective, I can tell noble lords how clubs change hands, and it isn't how the bill contemplates. The bill anticipates that at some point someone dreams big and they need to submit themselves to the IFR so that an army of Rachels can measure them up for the sheepskin coat, which is that particular uniform that owners of football clubs tend to wear. Now, forget for a moment that time might be of the essence, that they might be subject to an HMRC winding up order, or there might be other cash flow issues. Even before the seller can open the books, the purchaser needs to have been vetted by a civil servant. Now, how have we come to this place? Because this isn't how deals work. Unless the books are opened, how could the purchaser even know whether the deal was feasible? But then, unless the purchaser was qualified, the seller could not open those books for fear that person was a charlatan. You can see the jeopardy here. Quite simply, the new law, and clause 27 in particular, would prevent buyer and seller from being put together. This bill purports to stop clubs going bust, but the actions of the bill would ensure that they did. Now, as I look back and reflect over the ownership of our club in Norwich, doing my small slice of ownership, I recall how Norwich City Football Club was owned by Robert Chase, a local builder. But when the wind blew out of his sails, it needed somebody with deeper pockets to take over, but nobody came forward. Now, by and by, a man called Geoffrey Watling, who owned a local taxi firm, came forward to act as a midwife, and he held that club whilst he hawked it around. Here was a modest man with a deep interest in the community. He understood the role of the football club can and should be, and he put himself in harm's way when nobody else would step up to the plate. And all fans, Norwich fans, thank him for what he did, and the main stand even today is named for him. Now, eventually, Delia Smith, the famous TV chef, together with her husband, Michael Wynne-Jones, acquired the shares of the club in a story that was beautifully told in the Times about 3 weeks ago. It must have been a very expensive taxi ride for them both, and no two people could have done more to act in the public interest and save our club. Now, last week, the club entered a new phase, with a new owner, Mark Anastasio, taking a leading role. We hope he can bring us to past glories, and by all accounts, he is a worthy custodian of our club. But, my lords, I tell you, I'd rather have Delia's blessing than Rachel's. And the purpose of telling you these tales is that had there been a regulator operating at clause 27, Robert Chase would have thrown in the towel long before he did. Kind-hearted Geoffrey Watling would not have been allowed to step in as midwife because he would have failed clause 37, paragraph 4. He only owned a taxi company. He had no qualifications. And you'd have to question why a husband and wife team from Suffolk would put themselves in harm's way to own the Norwich City Football Club in Norfolk, similarly failing clause 37, paragraph 4, because I don't think being a cook necessarily is the requisite qualification for club ownership. Put simply, as a result of clause 27, our club would have folded and would prevented these deals from happening even before they started. With the best of intentions, Labour is creating a doom loop for clubs in trouble. They're creating a vortex from which a few will be able to escape. The consequence of 27 is to condemn a club in trouble to extinction. Now, my amendments would not stop the IFR from eventually certifying a clause under Clause 28, but it'll stop the snuffing out of hope at Clause 27. Now, of course, it's regrettable that only faceless bureaucrats can allow you to don the sheepskin coat in the first place. And in my view, the regulator should not be allowed at this early stage from preventing clubs from doing different, from taking those calculated risks, the rolling of the dice. Now, football is embellished not just by the great players like the Beckhams and the Ronaldos, but it's also decorated by the local characters, people like the Roberts, the Jeffreys, the Delias and the Michaels, and we should be encouraging them to dream. But Labour is at risk of turning our national game into the dull men's club, a system where local people are prematurely discouraged from standing up for their communities, and big business and remote shareholders with fat lawyers are preferred, which is, of course, in direct conflict with the two key outcomes set out in Clause 1, where the economic, social well-being of local communities are key objectives. Now, I was with Delia on that infamous Let's Be Avenue rant 20 years and 2 weeks ago. It's passed into our legend and our lexicon. It's part of the colour of the game and our nation. Yet this is exactly the sort of thing that will be lost if we don't attract and cherish the community-minded people. So for the sake of anyone who loves our game, don't make it even harder than it is to get to the start line. Abandon Clause 27 and let's just rely on Clause 28, at which point the deal certainty is greater.
Turn to Lord Moynihan's